It's the truth about parenting.
Something needs to be real for us.
The truth is in the raw things that people don't talk about.
This journey is not for the weak.
Welcome to the Mama Jack podcast. Hi, Rosemary. How are you today?
I'm so great. I'm so good, Jackie. How are you? So happy to be here.
I'm happy to have you. Welcome to the Mama Jack podcast. And tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a mom to two. I'm married to my best friend. We live in the national capital of Canada, Ottawa, Ontario. And I'm an authorized language of listening parenting coach who specializes in moms who are trying to parent differently than the way that they were parented. Typically, moms who had some childhood trauma and perhaps see that trauma showing up. Not perhaps, it always shows up, doesn't it? That's just the way parenting works. Our trauma shows up, right? It gives us that opportunity to start to work through it and start to heal it through parenting, but it also can cause a lot of really, really heavy stress. So this is what I've chosen to focus on because that was my experience of parenting. You know, I knew I didn't want to parent the way that I was parented. I wanted things to be very different for my kids. And I thought I had it all figured out until I had two under two and I started yelling at my babies. And I was like, what's going on? Why do I feel so out of control? Why can't I sleep at night? Because I'm ruminating over all the things I did all day that I regret. You know, what's going on? And I realized what I needed was some really concrete tools. And I didn't have those tools. I didn't even know if the tools that I was hoping for existed, but I found them and it changed everything for me.
I love that. I love that because I didn't have two under two, but my son was two and then I had my daughter like very shortly after. So I was close, but
Very close, yeah.
it's still wild. They're 4 and 2 now. So that was a couple years ago, but and let me tell you, yes, I went through a mental breakdown after it. So I know all the things. I learned all the things and I had to learn the hard way, right? So I'm so happy to have this information on this show today because if I could have heard something like this before, maybe it would have sparked something in my brain to like, oh, I actually have to heal stuff that I didn't even necessarily realize was traumatic. Like there's obvious trauma and then there's trauma that you're just like, oh yeah, that happened, but it's no big deal until you become a parent. And then it's like,
Yep.
hello, we're here. Everything shows up.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think too, when we're talking about childhood trauma, we just show up in the world. We don't know what to expect. So whatever comes to us, we just accept it. So we don't even realize that, like you said, you don't even realize that you have trauma sometimes because, yeah, it's just the way life came at you. It's just what happened.
Yeah, for sure.
So shall we talk about how this trauma shows up in parenting in particular and then what to do about it?
Yeah, for sure. And then I'll throw in some of my stuff too that, has happened with me. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. That would be so perfect. So good to hear. I mean, I love that. I love that about the world today, how much we can hear other people's experiences, because it's great to read research and all that stuff. You know, that stuff is really important. But I think what's the most important is really that community aspect of really understanding person-to-person experiences. I think that's when we can really get to the nitty-gritty and even connect through, some of the stuff that we've experienced. So when I talk about this, I kind of talk about the way that I explain it is it's like how the crap from your childhood shows up in your parenting. And then I like to talk about for sure what to do about it. So really when we're talking about this stuff showing up in our parenting and in our adult lives, it's basically showing up as triggering like a life or death response in us when the life or death response isn't necessary. It's just not needed. But our brain has labeled things as life or death because in our childhood, they were or they felt like they were. It was one or the other, or likely a combination of both, right? And so because, when we're kids, it's so important for us to be able to trust and rely on our caregivers, the people that are responsible for our survival. We really need to know that they're capable. And when, there starts to be some trip ups in that and whatnot, that can make the world a very, very scary place. And so again, this labeling things as dangerous. So, for example, loud noises. Sometimes loud noises could mean there's danger, right? If there's like a bear growling, 3 feet away from you, that's real danger, you know? But like if it's a child crying and it throws us into a life or death response, a child crying doesn't like it almost never means that there's a life or death like situation happening, right? Kids cry constantly, babies especially cry constantly, but it's the kind of thing. So crying, whining, even though high pitched sounds of whining, a child or somebody else yelling, or even like I say, just loud noises like kids laughing, kids banging their toys. These are ways that they're things that can show up in day to day life and parenting that we can have a very strong response to. And sometimes we recognize we're having a strong response, and sometimes again it doesn't register for us, but we kind of freak out, right? We can start yelling back or have a very, very strong response. And really what's happening is, or a way I like to describe it is just like the idea of us, like how easy it is for us to slip into the fight or flight stress response.
Yeah.
So once we've had a lot of stress in childhood, it's almost like you've got this dripping tap, the way a dripping tap like really has a little bit of a constant flow, or like when you have an IV drip in, right? Like there's just this constant little flow of, medicine or whatever being released into your system. And so, it's really like that it's just very easy for the full flow to come on for us when we've had, consistent stress in our childhood. So there's some ways that we can kind of deal with that, with those big reactions we have, or when we feel out of control, as a result of loud noises, or like I say, high pitched whining, or even just the things that our kids say to us sometimes can feel like life or death. I know a lot of moms really struggle when their kids say things to them like, I hate you, or you're the worst mom in the world. Even that can feel really terrible. And I mean, it's just kids expressing how they feel.
Yeah.
And we could go down a whole other road about why kids speak that way and why it trips us up, But just to get started, the number one thing that I like to share with moms, that I'd like to share with your listeners, is that like it's okay to remove yourself from a situation. As long as the child or children as long as they're safe, it's okay for you to remove yourself and tend to the little person inside of you first. And that is so important. That's such an important step. Now, if you can't get away, if you feel the yelling coming, if you feel a strong reaction coming, language of listening, which is the parenting model that I teach it and I use it. I love it. Like I use it in my own family, of course. But one of the things that they taught that really helped me to like completely break that habit of yelling at my kids, or that reaction of yelling at my kid, is to move into a space of exaggeration, which kind of sounds weird. Like, what? I'm angry and I'm supposed to exaggerate it? Yes. Because what you're doing is you're exaggerating it, but you're turning it into a game for the child, while at the same time, you're also taking responsibility for your own emotions. Oh my goodness. If we could be taking responsibility for our emotional reactions all the time, that would be like a huge block to us passing on any generational wounding. It is such a healing balm. And like it's been amazing for my kids when they go on the playground, or if a teacher's having a bad day and speaks to them, in a rude way. It doesn't bug my kids. It's like water off a duck's back, because I've been taking responsibility for my anger. And again, one of the ways I did that was by playing this exaggeration game, which is, when you feel that train rising up in you of anger and yelling, you can go into exaggerate it. You move your body like you're angry, but you stay in one spot. You can stomp your feet and pound your fist, but you just go, uh-oh, angry mommy's coming, and you kind of make it this growly, thing. So what you're doing is you're allowing your body to release all that energy that's building up, because trying to stop a moving train is not an easy thing to do. And it's not always the best thing to do, right? We need to move our own emotions through our bodies. We need to let that fight or flight get used up, all the hormones that are in there. But we can do it in a way that it's not, quote unquote, damaging our kids. Because I really felt like that's what I was doing when I was yelling at my kids. So I started doing this exaggeration thing I learned from language of listening, swinging my fist. Oh, angry mommy's coming. And my kids started giggling. And I was so relieved, because it bought me, 5 to 10 seconds to, again, use up those hormones, but then like get my brain back, like let my brain come back online so I could be free to choose how I wanted to respond in that situation. And I have to tell you, Jackie, there were a few times when I forgot. I actually like was angry and started yelling, and they started laughing anyways, because they were so used to me making it this exaggeration thing, that I, again, was so relieved that there was this space in there that was built in for me, but also still worked for them for the times that I forgot. And then I just didn't need it anymore. I didn't need it anymore after about 3 months. I think it probably took me to really get rid of that yelling. And I was so thankful and so grateful for having such an easy tactic, I guess, in my back pocket that wasn't just protecting my kids, it was protecting me too.
Yeah.
It was honoring where I was, as well. And so it's really, really genius. So I did say if you can't get out of the room in time or if it's too late, you can use this exaggerating. But I also talked about tending to that little child inside of you that's having a big reaction to the crying and the whining. So let's talk about what to do with that little person if we're going to look after them, that little person inside of us. So in language of listening, first off, it's a very simple parenting model. It's just 3 tools. They're the only 3 tools that you need for parenting, for holding boundaries, for growing confidence in your kids. Like it's amazing. The founder she's a genius, and she's just really able to like distill all like really potent information into very easy to use tools. And that's what we all need as parents anyways, because we're in these like definite situations that are like what I like to call usually chaotic emergencies, where we have to run around and handle things very, very quickly. So it's nice if there's only 3 tools that we have to remember. And at the beginning, there's only the one tool. There's just the one tool, which is called say what you see, where you just reflect back to the child anything you see them saying, doing, thinking, or feeling. But you can do that with that little child inside of you too, who's having a big reaction to loud noises. What I tell the moms that I work with is get into the bathroom, close the door, look at yourself in the mirror, and speak to yourself using this say what you see and using the word you. So, like you're an observer, you're so frustrated. That makes your brain feel like it's going to explode when you hear all those loud noises. You wish they would keep those loud sounds for outdoors, and you just keep validating yourself. And usually for me, like a lot of the times, when I would start validating myself, like when I had the biggest breakthroughs about my yelling or my anger that was rising up very quickly, it was actually that I was really scared. It was actually really coming from a place of fear, deeply rooted way long time ago, decades ago in my childhood. And so to recognize, oh, that's fear rising up. There's fear because I'm afraid I might have to hold a boundary. Right? I'm afraid that I'm going to be rejected. Like there's many different fears that can come up. Even when our kids are late, when my kids were going to be late, they weren't putting their shoes on when I asked them. Right away, I was trying to stay so patient. But really this fear in me started building up. I'm going to get rejected by society because I'm late for this event, right? The teachers are going to be mad at me or the coordinators or whatever. And I'm really trying to just protect this little child inside of me by, controlling my children's behavior. And like, really, if we stop to think about it, controlling our children's behavior is not going to help us deal with fear. It's just not.
I mean,
Like, it's not a cool
behavior. Like, no matter what you do, you start to control one and then a new one pops up. And how are you going to control that one? Like, you really can't. It's really, yeah. It's rare. I wouldn't say you can't. It's rare. From what I
Yeah, well, we can hold firm boundaries, but actually controlling, right? And I, most of us have learned this is really not a healthy way to function is to try to control a little person. We want them to make their choice. They're making their choices anyways, right? But I guess one of my like beliefs about parenting is that I don't want my children making decisions based on fear, which is one of the other ways the crap shows up in our parenting that I'll talk about later. But just that idea of making decisions based on fear, I do not want my children learning that that's how we function in the world. It's really important to me not to pass that on. So again, getting in the bathroom, speaking to yourself, talking about how you feel, and really getting down to the root of what you want in that moment. And it could be that you want comfort because you feel really afraid. I feel so afraid because my kids are not doing what I say. It's making me feel helpless and powerless. That's how I felt when my parents spanked me, and I hate this feeling and I just have to make it stop and I can't make it stop inside myself. It feels like it's my children that are causing this feeling. I need them to stop what they're doing to stop it. Really uncovering those things. Those things can come up very easily if we start using, again, that say what you see with ourselves, because all of our emotions and our reactions, like they're just messages. That's all they are. And when we've had a childhood where we've stuffed a lot of our emotions and a lot of our needs, they get really loud. Yeah. That's one of the reasons why we yell, right? Is because we just want to be heard. Mm-hmm. Or there's a part of us, there's a little child inside of us that wants to be heard, that's been silenced for so long. And for me, my experience was I'm in front of little kids now. I'm not as afraid as I was when there was adults. Right? So it was a safer place for my fear and anger to come out, where it wasn't safe for those emotions to come out in my childhood, but they were spilling out all over the place. And I hated it. I really, really hated that way of functioning, you know? So a couple of other things that people can kind of keep in their back pocket when they are having big reactions to loud noises or to whining or to crying. One is just to recognize it's probably a sign and a message that you need a little extra self-care. That's not always the easiest thing for us to go after or get, as parents, but it is really, really important. And when you are looking after yourself, you will be able to bring a better version of yourself to your kids, right? And you're also showing them that it's okay for them to look after themselves. The most effective thing that we do as parents is to model for our children. So much more what we do than what we say affects our kids. And so whatever we're modeling for them is really, really important. So it's okay. It's okay for mom to need a few minutes. That means when your child has an emotional response and reaction, they know you've modeled for them. It's okay for them to need a few minutes. But also, once we give that to ourselves, that's when we're truly able to give it to our kids. Once we tend to that little person inside of us and we actually learn how to do it by using say what you see and acknowledging our own emotions, that's when we're really going to be able to do it for our kids as well. And that's a really beautiful piece of parenting, I think, too, like how it doesn't leave us behind. We're actually not meant to stuff ourselves as moms and as parents. We're really meant to show up with all our needs, with all our wounds, with all the things, and make those things, really, really be okay. And then the last piece of advice that I can really give for this one piece of crap that shows up in our parenting, from our childhood, is to start to change the narrative, start to change the meaning that we have placed on crying in our society. There's so many judgments attached to crying. The truth is, like the scientific truth is that when somebody's crying, it means that they're adapting to the situation. So many times society has told us that, when your child cries, they're a crybaby. They're not able to handle the situation, right? They're having this meltdown. There's something wrong with them, which means there's something wrong with you as a parent, right? These are all the nasty messages that we get from society that are complete lies, right? They're complete lies. The truth is, when your child is crying, they're actually moving towards a solution. The crying is actually making changes happen in their brain that's allowing them to grow and to change. That's what's happening. So like crying's actually not a bad thing at all. And if you can't handle listening to it and it's safe to leave your child, what you can do is just let them know. You validate their emotion. You say what you see with them, right? You're really upset. This is so important to you that there's tears coming. And it's very loud for mommy's ears. It feels very loud in here. So I'm going to be in my bedroom. But if you need me, that's where I'm going to be and you can come and get me. That way, if the child really, really needs connection and really needs you, they'll follow you to your bedroom and you'll probably find a way to either help them quiet down or to sit with the crying and, figure out a way to self-coach after that because the child really, really needs you in that moment. Or the child will be fine. They're actually fine on their own, just moving through their crying. I have one daughter that really appreciates when somebody's with them when you're crying. And I have another daughter that just really wants to be left alone to work her stuff out. Mm-hmm. And then she'll come. So children are different and their situations that they're experiencing are different too. The one that likes to be alone crying, it's not always the case. It's often the case, but it's not always the case. So, we stay flexible to all of that. So that was just one of the ways that I talk about the crap showing up. Let's jump into number 2, which is this feeling of never being good enough, being convinced that you're never good enough. So when I was newly married, I'd been married for about 10 weeks and I burnt out at work. And my doctor said, you're off work for 3 months. You can start with some medication, you can start with therapy, or I can prescribe both. What do you want? And I said, let's just start with the therapy. So I ended up on a therapist's couch. And she said, why are you working so many overtime hours? Why are you burnt out? And I had never really thought about why I was working so many overtime hours. And I was kind of surprised about the answer that popped out of my mouth, which was, well, I'm just trying to prove that I'm worth the space I take up in the world. And there was that crap from my childhood already showing up before I had kids. Now, in a matter of weeks, I found that I was pregnant with my first child, right? And it was during those therapy appointments that she's like, you had a highly abusive childhood. And I was like, wait, I did? Like, because I didn't know. And I was like 34 years old.
Yeah.
I was 34 years old when I found out that I had a severely abusive childhood. I didn't know. I saw the videos on, at school. I mean, I was in school in like the 80s, right? Mm-hmm. So like we would have these videos about child abuse, but it would be like, parents putting their cigarette butts out on kids' arms. And I'm like, well, my parents don't smoke, so I must not be abused because they don't smoke and they're not putting any cigarettes out on my arm. Meanwhile, like I was being pretty severely abused, but I didn't know. And they didn't talk about it in that way back in the day. And even still today, they don't talk about it a ton. I feel like it could be talked about a lot more. But how that never good enough shows up for a lot of people is perfectionism, right? Just again, that everything has to be perfect all the time. Here's where that controlling of the child's behavior can really show up. We need our children to behave perfectly. We need to control their behavior, because if everything's not perfect, there's this danger lurking. And like our brain believes there's this danger, because if we weren't perfect when we were kids, we may have, experienced abuse as a result of that. That was the case with me. I became highly perfectionistic because I knew that was a way that I could keep my mom happy and then avoid getting hit, like literally. And the other thing we do when we feel like we're not good enough is we self-abandon. So those are some of the ways that show up. So again, when it is really hard to get self-care, sometimes it's that self-abandonment showing up. And what really works really well to start to counteract this is, again, coaching yourself, using the tools from language of listening. And I don't think I was clear when I said that there are 3 tools in this model, but the tools, you use the same 3 tools with your kids that you use with yourself, that you can use these tools to reparent yourself or to get yourself to a place where you're ready to hold your boundaries and you know what you really want. And so that you're like in a place where you're free to choose the way that you act as a parent, so that you're really able to connect with your authentic self first, so that who you are is showing up as a parent. And that's really how you get to a place where you love the way you parent, where it feels good, where parenting feels good and so much less draining. Oh my goodness, when we can feel like we've got a solid foundation from which to make our decisions in parenting, holy moly, it really takes a lot of pressure off, because there is so much societal pressure on us. There's so many messages from society that are so negative, that aren't even true, that really make parenting really, really hard. And then if you've got trauma on top of that, then it's, you've got all that fear and whatnot mixed in there. It really, really makes it difficult. So again, we're talking about feeling like you're never good enough. And so a big piece of reparenting, probably the biggest piece, is the way I like to talk about it is a fountain. And so it's like we should have this fountain inside of us. We all have this thirst of the question, am I good enough? Am I lovable? Do I have good things to offer the world? And that's a thirst. And we should be able to go inside of us and get some water out of a very active fountain, a very active, healthy fountain that answers yes for us and quenches that thirst. But so many of us have a fountain that's barely dribbling out any water. So what ends up happening is we have these empty cups and we're going around to other people asking the question, am I good enough? Am I good enough? Can you fill my cup? And really, somebody else's definition of what makes you good enough, it's probably going to be somewhat different than your definition of what makes you good enough, and you really want to make sure that you're being your authentic self out in the world. And the people that are sending you the message that you're good enough are the people that can see your authentic self and value it, right? The way I like to talk about it is your understanding of your good enoughness is like cake. And other people being able to validate your good enoughness is like icing on that cake. The icing tastes really good, but if all you have is icing, you're going to get sick. You can handle just having cake, right? So that's probably the healthier piece of cake in general, is the cake part. But it's that idea of, yes, it's good to have that outside validation, absolutely. But when you're depending on it for life, right? If that's what's the only thing that's filling up your cup, then you're really going to be struggling. And so it's parents' job to prime the pump of that fountain inside of us. Our parents are supposed to pour in a little bit of water of self-belief to get our pump functioning properly. And if they don't, then that pump is not going to be pouring out the water that we need. But we can prime the pump ourselves. Once we become adults, we can prime the pump ourselves. And the way that we do that is we use a tool called the strengths tool from language of listening. And the strengths tool is really about seeing the proof of what you've done or what you want, and then naming a strength that goes with it. And so with kids, it's typically we'll do say what you see first and then name the strength. I always like to talk about the first time I used the strengths tool with my youngest, because she was 3. And I was like, okay, how am I going to learn how to start pointing out strengths all the time in my kids? Because strengths is really all about when you see behavior you like, you point out the child's strength, and then that actually wires their brain to believe that about themselves. And we all act according to who we believe we are. Mm-hmm. We act according to who we believe we are, right? So if we can get our kids to believe things about themselves, they will act that way. They will even create opportunities to continue to experience the strengths that we point out to them. So when my daughter was 3, I was like, okay, what's a good strength to point out in a toddler? And I thought, well, helpful is a great strength to point out in her. So I asked her to get me a butter knife out of the kitchen. So she got me a butter knife and brought it. So I did say what you see, because we always use say what you see first. But in this instance, what say what you see does is it gives proof of what the child is doing or whatever. The strengths tool is very different than praise. Praise is something that we'll often use with our kids, like good girl, good boy, right? We want to build them up. The problem with praise is all it does is teach our kids that they've pleased us. It
Yeah.
doesn't teach them about who they are and the strengths that are in them, whether we're there or not, whether anybody notices or not, right? And so she brought me the butter knife. So I just said, "You brought me the butter knife when I asked." I just say what you see. That shows you're helpful. So 2 more times that day, I pointed out the helpful strengths to her. And she said, "Mommy, you keep saying that." And I said, "Well," I said, "Yeah, it's just something I'm noticing about you today." And the fourth time I named the strengths tool for her, she dragged the chair across the kitchen floor over to the sink. And she said, "Mama, whenever you're feeling sick, I'm going to help." And she said, "I'm going to help right now by washing the dishes." My 3-year-old wanted to wash dishes
Oh,
because I was been saying, a few times that day that she was helpful. You see, they create opportunities to experience that, the strengths that we're pointing out in them. And it really does rewire their brain, or wires their brain, because at that age, they're just getting new wiring, right? It wires their brain to believe that about themselves. We can rewire our brains to start to look for and notice the strengths that we have inside of ourselves. And it even changes our self talk. I had a client who she was using the strengths tool with her daughter. And then her daughter walked into the kitchen where her mom was one day. And she said to mom, she said, "I just cleaned my desk." There's the say what you see. And she said, and then she goes, "That shows I'm responsible." And I started laughing in this moment. So we were laughing because we're like, this is how this girl speaks to herself now.
yeah.
This is how she speaks to herself. She sees the good things that she does and she sees them as proof of these strengths that she carries inside of her, which is amazing, right? It's absolutely amazing. So we can do that for ourselves. We can see what we're doing, and you can just do this all day long. If you're a person that's struggling with not being good enough, you can, and even as a perfectionist, like maybe you're cleaning the bathtub and there's a spot and you just can't leave it. And you're like, is that perfectionism showing up again? Right. But just be like, you're thorough. Look how thorough you are. Look, you like to get the job done, right? Like turn it into something positive, because when it's something positive, it doesn't control us anymore.
Mhm.
Right. We're more free to choose whether we want to go after that last spot or not. If we're too exhausted to clean the last spot in the tub and we push ourselves beyond it. Sometimes it's good to push yourself and sometimes it's not, right? So when you have the freedom to really balance those things out, that's really, really powerful. Yeah. So I have 2 more to talk about, Jackie, I don't know if you have any thoughts about the things that I've already said, or.
I just think they're super helpful, honestly, and even for yourself. I love this whole thing because it's for you and your children. And oh, knowing the triggers, like I just wish I would have known that. I had a ton of stuff happening with me though. So it was just like one on top of the other, on top of the other, on top of the other, So it's like, yes, I did try to talk to myself positively, but there was still so much hormonal stuff happening. I think I just couldn't get to a place where I could see myself clearly. So, whew, but this is such a beautiful program. Like I said, I love the work with it's like you said, it's easy to remember and it's you and your kid. So you're reparenting yourself, which is the biggest thing with trauma during childhood is just there are so many ways to do it, right? But this is such a cool way because not only are you doing it for yourself, you're doing it for your child. And it's not just that, oh, you're making yourself better so you can show up better for your child. It's kind of like you're growing together at the same time.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think the thing that's really cool about that idea of growing together is also sometimes I didn't feel like I had enough self love to put the effort in for myself to learn how to use these tools, but I could put the effort in to do it for my kids. And then it was so much easier to do it for myself. Or sometimes I really needed to do it for myself first to learn, like to get really good at it, to get good at the very, tiny pieces of really seeing different things in them or seeing the strengths or whatever. So there was a lot of back and forth. And that was really, really a beautiful piece of it. So the third piece of crap that I like to talk about that shows up from our childhood in our parenting, and I already mentioned it a little bit, but it's anxiety. It's making decisions based on fear. Or the way I like to talk about it is making decisions based on trying to prevent bad things from happening. Because I really felt like that's what I was taught in my childhood from the trauma, was like it was up to me to try to do all the things that I could to try and prevent bad things from happening. And that was like next to near impossible when I had parents that were completely out of control, completely unpredictable, and who were not getting any help. They felt like they were perfectly fine the way that they were, and they, justified the way that they were. And, sadly, they were doing the best that they could.
Yeah.
They really were trying to do the best they could. I mean, you can't really help it when you have a personality disorder. There's only so much you can do. And when some personality disorders kind of somewhat prevent people from feeling safe enough to go get help, and so that can play into it a lot as well. But really, this anxiety, what it can start to do is, well, it really influences our decisions. And a lot of ways that we often don't recognize, it can really fly under the radar. And it can also become self fulfilling prophecies. So, one of the things that happened with my husband and I is we were like starting to get a little bit worried about our youngest daughter and her eating habits. And we're like, oh no, she's not eating enough healthy food. And we started to get very anxious about it, right? We started making decisions trying to prevent bad things from happening. And what happened was we brought our anxiety to the dinner table. Every time it was supper time, we brought our anxiety there. We were starting to put a lot of pressure on her. And you know what ended up happening is it made the situation way worse.
Yeah.
Right? It became this self-fulfilling prophecy where she picked up on our anxiety. So she started feeling a lot of anxiety at mealtime. And that made her tummy queasy, which meant that she didn't really feel like eating anything at all. Right. And so this idea of, okay, where is again all this fear coming from? When I talked about with the first piece, like a lot of times my yelling was actually coming from a place of deep fear. And I had this thing in my childhood where I had a mother who wanted me to be afraid of absolutely everything, and a father who wanted me to be afraid of absolutely nothing. So much so that we used to take this ferry that took like 3 levels of cars and then 3 levels for people to walk around. And my dad would hold me over the edge of the ferry, over the fence, over the open ocean, and throw me up in the air and catch me. And I had no idea how dangerous that was as a child. But he didn't want me to be afraid of anything. He didn't want my sister to be afraid of anything either. She was 5 years younger than me. When he did it to me, I would ask him a lot of questions about what would happen if you dropped me, blah, blah, blah. When he did it to her, she would freak out and scream and cry. And he would get so angry at her for being afraid. And meanwhile, now I think about it, I'm like, if he had dropped me,
Yeah.
he would have been in jail.
Yeah.
Right? My family would have been without me, without one of the daughters. They would have been without their father. He wouldn't have been able to financially support us. We were a one income family. Like it just would have caused such a huge, huge mess if he had have dropped, either my sister or I. He never did it to my brothers. I don't know why. It's kind of a strange thing. I had 4 brothers and 1 sister, but he did not want us to be afraid. And so inside of me, the little person took this message that it's not safe to feel afraid. What do you do with that? Because we need to trust our emotions, right? When fear shows up, if it shows up in a truly scary situation, it's not anxiety, it's like real fear. It's so good. It's so important, right? Like fear really does, it mobilizes us to run, to fight, to do what we need to do. It's of high, high importance. But for me, I was afraid to be afraid. And so it was just fear all the time, but not fear about the right things, And so this can happen to us a lot too. And again, anxiety can show up in so many different ways in us. But again, starting to acknowledge all of your emotions and accept your emotions, because again, emotions are just a message. They're often a message about boundaries being crossed. Sometimes we have emotions that show up. And this comes from a therapy model called AEDP. And it really talks about how we have some emotions that will show up that will inhibit other emotions. So some emotions that were not okay in our childhood, like for me, fear. We could say that when I was getting angry with my kids, it was showing up to hold back my fear so that my fear wasn't acknowledged because it didn't feel safe to be afraid. We can have a lot of things like that. So this is where getting back in the bathroom, acknowledging, your emotions with the say what you see. And the say what you see also works really, really well as journaling. For me, I had my biggest breakthroughs using say what you see to self-coach when I was writing it out and really talking about how I felt and what was going on. And one of the things that we look for when we're using say what you see, and we know that we've really hit down to the very core of what's going on, is we watch for a physical reaction inside of ourselves. And that physical reaction shows up in one of two ways. Either we start crying because we finally really hit on that nerve, that wound, and it's open now, right? It's open to the air. It can start to heal. And so, and we just feel fully, fully understood, And then the other way, feeling fully, fully understood, is that we just start nodding our head. That's the other physical reaction. Like, yes, that is how it feels. We feel really like adamant, yes, that is exactly how it feels. That is what's going on, And really, really understanding ourselves is key. It's really, really key to get the messages from those emotions so that we can, really start to move on and glean the wisdom that our emotions have for us. Because expressing emotions in childhood for almost all of us, let's be honest, our emotions probably triggered our parents, or at least some of them did.
Yeah.
right? Even for my parents, a lot of laughing, like on Christmas Day or in the backseat of the car, that really triggered my parents. Now I understand. I have a deeper understanding because I'm like, oh, I get the nervous system response that happens when you have a freak out over loud noises.
Yeah.
And it makes me sad, and now I learn that if my nervous system is freaking out because my kids are laughing, if my nervous system is in a place where that drip is a little bit too turned on too much, I'll just walk out, right? Because it's just showing me, okay, you need a couple seconds to acknowledge what's going on, or you're overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Your system's overwhelmed. And that's another thing I really want to communicate to people. Like, it's okay when you reach the top of your capacity, whatever that is. It's okay for you to pay attention to your capacity. It's not even okay. It's really important.
Yeah. I
It's
agree.
really important to acknowledge your capacity, right? And that's part of that self-abandonment that we could have talked about when I was talking about never good enough, where we really do ignore ourselves and we abandon ourselves. That idea of really being okay with our capacity, really being okay with acknowledging when our nervous system is overwhelmed and tending to it, that's really, really huge. Really huge. So I have one more thing to talk about, which is the flip-flopping that happens between nice mom and mean mom. Again, that feeling kind of out of control and really trying hard to be very, very patient. And we'll be patient and we'll ask 10 times nicely, and then we flip out. Or sometimes we become such a nice mom that it's actually because we're in the fawn state and we've just had to let go of even, trying to care because it's too much. And many times why this happens, it's really the main reason why it happens, is we were never taught how to identify and honor our boundaries, our personal boundaries. We just don't know how to do it. Like for me, I really believe that boundaries were mean and controlling. That's what my brain believed. That's how my brain was wired, that boundaries are mean and controlling. And what happened then was I subconsciously believed I needed to become a mean and controlling person in order to hold boundaries. This is why I was flip-flopping between mean mom, nice mom. I was like, be patient, be patient, be patient. You don't want to be a mean and controlling mom. Be patient. But then when your child doesn't get out the door on time, or they're hitting their sister, or something else is happening, right? And you just know you have to hold a boundary. The only way my brain knew was to blow up. And so language of listening, thank goodness, swooped in, and taught me how to identify what my boundaries are, which is super, super easy. It's just your preferences. It's just your likes and dislikes. That's it. If you don't like something, that's a boundary for you. That's it. And that's all it needs to be. It doesn't need to be this big, other people say it is or whatever. Once we start going and trying to get answers in other people's boundaries, they're not our boundaries anymore. It's really hard to hold other people's boundaries, especially without a lot of drama around them. And that's us going around with that empty cup again. You don't want to go around with that empty cup trying to get answers from other people. We have an incredible wisdom inside of ourselves, and we're the people that love our kids. Nobody else is going to love your kids the way that you do. So when you get in touch with your authentic self, your mom is going to show up like the most amazing, right? Exactly what your child needs. Exactly what your child needs. So to be able to identify your boundaries, and then I love this for language of listening because it taught me how to hold my boundaries in ways that left my kids feeling empowered, in ways that actually taught them new life skills, and that left me feeling empowered too. Instead of that mean mom that was laying in bed at night and couldn't sleep because she regretted all the yelling she did all day, all the ways that she overreacted to her kids. I hated that. I remember looking at them laying in their beds asleep at night going like, what did I get so upset about? I don't even remember what the upsetting things were.
Yeah.
Because they weren't that important as far as correcting them. They were important as messages for you. There's some parts of yourself that need some love, that need some tending to. Yeah. Yeah. So maybe I can talk about how to use the can-dos tool a little bit as well, just to kind of get into that about, when it comes to holding boundaries. So again, just to kind of review a little bit, the first tool we always start with is say what you see, which is that validation. When we talk about, emotions and what's going on and thoughts and all those things. And then, when we're seeing behavior we like, we're going to name the strength that's showing up, because that's going to rewire our brain or our kids' brains, whoever we're talking about. It's going to rewire that brain to believe that about ourselves, or for their children to believe about themselves. And what we believe about ourselves is how we act. That really directs the way that we act and the way that we're showing up. And then when we're seeing behavior we don't like, and we often see behavior that we don't like in ourselves, and we especially see behavior that we don't like in our children, right? Both of those things happen. And so we move into the can-dos, and can-dos are really about using say what you see to determine which of the three needs either you or your child is meeting, because language of listening says that all behaviors are driven by three healthy needs: experience, connection, and power. We can talk about what each of those needs really looks like, okay? But all behaviors are driven by those three healthy needs. It doesn't mean that all behaviors themselves are healthy. It doesn't mean that all behaviors are behaviors that we like, but we can always go back and trust the person's intentions. In language of listening, we have a question that really helps us uncover that. When you see your child doing something you don't like, you can ask yourself, why would a great kid do that? Or when you see yourself doing something you don't like, why would a great mom do that? And we start from that foundation that we're working with really great people. And I love that. I love being able to start from a place of thinking that people are pretty fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
People are fantastic. They're amazing. We don't always do amazing things, right? But the core of who we are is actually really, really amazing. And we're all just trying to meet needs. Now, the three needs are, we talk about experience. Experience is all like, I've got this body. What can I do with it? I've got this life. How can I enjoy it? And like for kids, that shows up as like a lot of experimenting and a lot of exploring. During the pandemic, I was living in a place in Canada where the lockdowns were severe. And what I saw my kids doing to two big things that I saw them doing that I didn't like was I was finding my jewelry in bits and pieces all over our house.
Oh,
And
no.
I was finding shampoo smeared all over the bathroom wall. And I'm like, I don't like this. Do not like this. But they're meeting their need for experience. That was telling me, because we were so locked down, we weren't even allowed to go for walks outdoors in the park. Like that was like a no-no. You got fined if you went for a walk in the park. And so we were so closed in that they really they have to learn, they have to grow, they have to expand. Kids just do, right? And so I needed to start providing opportunities for them that would meet that need in a way that felt good for them, right? That actually satisfied the need for them, but that fell within my boundaries because they were outside of my boundaries smearing that shampoo on the wall. I hate trying to clean shampoo off the wall, especially when it's like clear and you don't notice it the first day.
Yeah.
It's like dry and you're like, how many hours do I have to stand here scrubbing to get this off all the way, So that's experience. Really, if your kids are climbing on the furniture or if they're experimenting with things, like maybe they've poured, I was just remembering too, my daughter poured turmeric all over the floor and it got wet and like stained the floor yellow.
Oh
Like,
my God. Yeah.
I can laugh about it now, but at the time it was like, oh my goodness, right? Outside of my boundaries, I don't like this behavior. And yet it's a need that's got to get met. So to help redirect her to, this is what you can do, right? That's why we call the tool can do's, is we work with the child to figure out a way that works for them and works for us to continue to meet that need. So that's experience. Connection is a pretty obvious need, right? Just, verbally connecting, physically connecting with other people. I believe we need to connect with ourselves too. And then power. A lot of people think that power has to do with power over, or especially those of us with trauma, maybe believe that the need for power has to do with having power over people. But it's really about feeling capable. The child feels capable, feels like they have something to offer their family, the world, their classroom, wherever they're finding themselves. And so we can find one or a combination of those three needs inside every behavior that we do or that our children do. And so when we can use say what you see to uncover the need that's being met, then we can find a can do that's going to help that child or help us meet that need in a way that we like, in a way that falls inside of our boundaries. And that's so powerful. And again, like, imagine the difference between, sending a child on, on the timeout step where they have to think about what they've done, right? And they're just sitting there like, they don't know what the boundaries are. They don't know, right? They just know they got in trouble because they wanted to explore or experiment, which is this like huge drive in them that needs got to get met. They just do, And so when we can come alongside our kids and be like, hey, this is a different way you can meet that need. Does it feel satisfying to you? Or do you have any ideas that you could suggest that maybe you could, because it looks like you want to climb on things when they're climbing on the furniture. Looks like you want to climb on things. And this furniture isn't for climbing on. Is there something you could climb on outside that you would enjoy and just see if that fits? Or I can take you to the park later and I'll get you you can climb on things then, but this furniture is not for climbing on or jumping on or whatever's, happening in the moment. But again, just seeing what's that need, and how can we help them meet that need inside of our boundaries? And like I say, the same goes for us. When we're finding that we're doing things that we don't like, whether it's in motherhood or whatever part of our adult life, because our survival mechanisms are showing up and directing our behaviors in ways, again, that we don't like, right? We can start to use these tools, the say what you see, the can do's. And then whenever we use a can do, what we actually do is we actually bring the strength in after. Because we want to, again, get that brain wiring in there to change the belief, in the person about who they are. So then we'll bring say what you see back and the strength back once we've got a solution for that behavior that we don't like. So yeah,
I love
there you have
that.
it.
I love it all so much. It's so healing. And yeah, like I said, just being alongside of your kid, it's so humbling when you realize that you have to kind of be parented while being a parent. And you're pretty much in charge of that. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
And whenever you say like the tools work for both, it's such a relief because it does work for both. I see that, right? And also, it's like, oh, I have to be doing these things for my kids and I have to be doing these things for me. And well, sometimes, yeah, you do need a little extra. And what I like to say, especially, with my like spirituality, right, is like you're giving energy, you're giving energy, you're giving energy. Before you do that, you don't give energy when your cup is full. You give energy, you keep giving yourself energy and it overflows. And that's when it fills everybody else around you. Right. And I try to instill that in anybody that mentions anything like that with the whole cup thing. I'm like, yes, you're filling your cup. You're not only filling your cup, you want to strive to overflow that cup. So you are constantly
Mm.
getting what you need, and everything else is just getting what you can give, right? And when you look at a cup and you actually pour it, it the things around it get less as you're pouring it than they would if you were overflowing, right? So that whole analogy to me, I was just like mind blown when I saw that. And I was like, absolutely, absolutely. And it's hard sometimes to find little things that can help you with that mindset. I know it is. When my husband works all the time, I have to find that time. I have to find that sacred time for myself. And with you saying walk away, absolutely. I was told that once by somebody. I was like, make sure, or actually my therapist, make sure they're safe. If they're safe,
Yeah.
screaming isn't gonna kill a baby, okay? If they can jump out of the crib, that might hurt the baby. But if they're safely in their crib and they are screaming, go take a breath or two. Also, I wanna bring up, and this is the second podcast I'm bringing this up in. I'm gonna approach them as a sponsor because I feel like they need to be the official sponsor of the Mama Jack podcast. Loop earplugs. Have you heard of them? They take the
Yes.
decibels
Yes.
down. Because often my husband and my son is in this period where he screams. He's playing, I don't want to dull his creativity, anything, no matter how many times we say, can you bring your voice down? It's like he doesn't know how almost. So I'm like, boop. And I thought it was hilarious. And other people that aren't parents think it's hilarious. But when you are a parent, you know how important it is that it literally states parenting as one of the things you use it for.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it protects your capacity, doesn't it?
Mhm. And
It
it gives
protects
you an extra
what
couple
your
minutes
nervous
of that
system doesn't.
screaming before you're like, "Okay, I need a second." Or it might not even throughout the day, you don't even get there. You can still hear everything, but everything's a little calmer. I don't have them yet, but I'm serious about reaching out to them because this is the second time I've mentioned them, and I'm like, "Dang, they are a good tool to have for new parents." Me and my husband were joking the other day, and we were like, for every kid's second birthday we go to, we're buying the parents a set of loop earplugs. And they're going to be like, why would you do that? You don't want to silence your kids. And then one day they're going to be like, where the are those earplugs? Where are they? It's so much just
Yeah.
like that. But I
Yeah.
think this whole program is so beautiful. And like I said, just the interaction and the growing with your child, it just means so much more that way and makes it a lot easier to handle too. Because, like I said, you're not having to have this special time away. You're actually growing as you're parenting. And that is beautiful because I've seen both, right? But I've never seen it together the way that you described it today. And it's gorgeous. I love it so much.
Yeah. I agree. I agree. It's kind of magical, actually, this parenting model. Something kind of magic about it. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. And
Mhm.
it's hard to realize when you're in those states of rage, sometimes if it's from PTSD, it's a fight or flight response. So I feel like actually getting to know yourself and getting to know what's going on in your head is super important as well as you start a journey like this. Getting to the bottom of what's going on in your head and then tailoring that. Because what you said, like trauma and PTSD go hand in hand. And if you have both, it's probably double hard. The more things you stack, the harder it kind of feels, right? But once you
Yeah.
can get in the clear a little bit in your mind, however you can do that, it starts to become a lot easier. And I don't know about you, I would recommend baby steps as well with all of this stuff. Like start
Yeah.
slow, with
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
one of the steps that you're talking about. Start that, even if it's just that one step for a month.
Yeah, because you're rewiring your
Mhm.
brain, right? You're rewiring your brain, and that doesn't happen overnight, but it's literally like a biological, like physical thing that's happening inside your head. And it takes time and it takes repetition. And so, yeah, baby steps are great because, a lot of times people talk about like how important failure is, but actually we learn best and we keep going when we experience success. It's actually success training is one of the things that we teach as part of language of listening. And I'll just give a quick example. When your child is learning how to do up their zipper, for example, the hardest part is getting those two
Mhm.
pieces together, the two zipper pieces together at the beginning. And so that's typically the really, difficult piece. That's really the piece that parents have to help with. If you just help your child with that part and you let them be the one that zips the zipper up the rest of the way, they're going to learn how to zip up their zipper so much faster because you've given them the taste and the experience of success. Even though they didn't do completely on their own, they still experience a piece of success in there. And you can name a strength, right? Even as well, when that happens, which will make it go even faster. But that idea of experiencing, little bits of success, that really, really keeps us going, helps us meet our need for power, right? And keeps us progressing. And it's so, so important. Yeah.
I
Yep.
love that. Yes, my 2-year-old is obsessed with zippers right now. She sells zip, 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 and I'll wear a hoodie, and I'm like, "Oh, I'm so scared she's gonna get my neck." I'm like,
Oh,
"You
yeah.
can pull it down as far as it'll go because I don't wanna stop her because she's so excited." But at the same time, if
Yeah.
you've ever been pinched by a zipper, man.
Oh, you don't want to be. No, no, that would be so painful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing all this information. It was such a pleasure to have.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so happy to be here.
Is is there any ending thing that you would like to give to the Mama Jack world and community?
Yeah, well, maybe two things. I mean, I'd like to just to share like what I think is so important a concept for people to kind of think about. And that is, I think one of the most important things we can be working towards is something called unconditional self-trust. And so if you really think about, what the heck is that, but that idea of really trusting yourself, like your boundaries are yours. And like I said, like nobody loves your kids at the level that you love them. Like you're the only one that can really give that full extent, of love to your kids. And your life is yours. Like you are the most important person in your life. That's fine. And the more you trust yourself, the more you are going to love other people because you do. You just love other people, right? And that love is going to be able to come out in very healthy ways, in ways that meet your needs and their needs too. All those things are so important. And then the other thing I would just like to share is how people can get in touch with me if they're interested in learning more about language of listening.
Get it. It's gonna
And
be in the show
I do
notes
work.
too.
Okay, great. Yeah. I do work with moms and with couples if both parents want to come along too. I have a 12-week program where I teach people how to reparent themselves while they're parenting their children and really learn how to use the language of listening tools in powerful ways so that they are equipping their kids with an unshakable confidence and with life skills, but they're also getting those things for themselves too, that so that they can feel really proud of themselves. And my business is called Love the Way You Parent because that's my goal is get people to a place where they feel free to choose the way that they're parenting. And when you're free to choose, you're going to choose all the ways that you like and all the ways that you love, to parent. And so that's why we call it Love the Way You Parent, because that's, that's my goal, getting people to love the way they parent along with that unconditional self-trust, really getting that in there. And when we have it for ourselves, that unconditional self-trust, then we can pass it on to our children as well. And people can just find me at lovethewayouparent.com. They can even email me at lovethewayouparent@gmail.com as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you.
Welcome to the end of another episode of the Mama Jack Real Raw Parenting Podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Remember, parenting is a journey filled with ups and downs, and it's okay to make mistakes along the way. The Mama Jack podcast is here to provide you with support, guidance, and real-life stories from fellow parents who are navigating the challenges of raising children. If you have any questions, topics you'd like me to cover, or stories you'd like to share, please reach out to me. I love hearing from my listeners and incorporating your experiences into future episodes. You can find me on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Podpage, all under The Mama Jack. TheMamaJac. Thank you for tuning in. Remember, you're not alone in this journey, and together we can create a supportive community of real, raw parents. Stay tuned for more episodes filled with laughter, tears, and everything in between. Until next time, keep being the amazing parent that you are.